Hello again, gamers. Welcome back for another episode of Grokking Battletech. I'm the board game captain, and today I'm going to be telling you how to grok the Exhumer. So I want to start by giving a big thank you to one of my regular viewers, Matthew Kelly, who requested I cover some Dark Age mechs, in particular the Exhumer and two others that are coming. Getting me a little bit outside my comfort zone here because I have never actually played in the Dark Age. But I had some fun doing some research with this, so this is going to be my first of my episodes covering some of the new designs from the Dark Ages, and this one will be for the Exhumer. So Matthew Kelly, this episode is for you. Now, before I get too into this, I do want to say I've got a ton of links in the description down below that you can check out at your leisure. There's a link to BoardGameCaptain.com, which is a great hub for all things Board Game Captain. There's also a link to my Teespring store where you can get yourself some cool Board Game Captain merch, t-shirts, mugs, etc. And there's a link to my Patreon. If you're in a position to and would like to support the channel, head over to my Patreon, link in the description down below. All right, so the Exhumer is a 50-ton mech from the Dark Ages. This is a fairly fast and maneuverable medium mech that has a lot of armor and a decent amount of firepower also. So actually pretty generally speaking, at first glance, pretty well designed mech. However, there are only two versions of the Exhumer in canon, and my personal opinion is that both are interesting at first glance, and then when you think more about them, you realize that there are some issues with the designs that make them kind of to some extent or another, not really live up to their promise, which is why I've actually made custom versions of both, along with the fact that there's so few canon versions, there's not a huge amount for me to talk about in regard to canon variants of the Exhumer. So the first canon variant of the Exhumer is the Exhumer EXR2X. Now, the Exhumer EXR2X is a 55-ton medium mech with 6'9" movement, no jumping, but 6'9" movement on a medium mech is actually quite fast. Now, granted, this seems to become a bit more common with all of the ways to save weight in the once you get up to the Dark Ages, but still fairly fast for a medium mech. It also has a ton of armor. In fact, maximum armor for its weight class. So it has 26 armor on the center torso, 9 on the head, 18 on the side torsos and arms, 26 on the legs, and 8 and 10 on the rear torso sections, respectively. Now, again, this is actually maximum armor for its size, which is really good. It's got 12 double heat sinks for 24 heat sinking capacity, which is really good. I really appreciate that. Some minor issues. It's got an extra light fusion engine, which is going to be a bit of an issue with keeping this thing not, dying when a side torso goes away. But lots of armor does help mitigate that somewhat, as well as the speed. And then for its weapon firepower, we've got an MRM-10, which is pretty decent. We've got two LRM-5s, which, these are just pinging weapons. They don't do a lot of damage. And we've got two ER large lasers. So now, at first glance, all of this seems good. You're like, okay, well, we've got some piercing weapons with the ER large lasers. We've got some, crit-seeking weapons with the two LRM-5s and the MRM-10. It's got a lot of heat-sinking capacity. It's got a lot of armor. But for all of these things, again, there are issues. So you've got the lot of armor, and I already said they've got an extra light fusion engine, which is a bit of an issue. Now, it does have a case 2 in its side torso where all that ammo is, but and that will definitely help to mitigate because you won't lose the entire torso with an ammo explosion. But remember, each one of those ammo explosions with a case 2 will still cause 1 point of internal structure damage before blowing the rest of the damage out the rear armor. That 1 point of damage could cause another crit and could still possibly cause a extra light fusion engine crit. Plus, losing all the rear armor in that section makes it easier for someone to get around you and blow off that side torso if they're dealing with fast interceptor type mechs on their side of the field as well. So there's some issues there. Now, the 24 double heatsink seems good, again, until you realize that all of that heat can be taken up by firing both ER large lasers, which means you're running, which is going to be another 2 heat. You're firing of the MRM-4, which is going to be another 4 heat, so now you're up to 6. And the firing of the 2 LRM-5s, which is another 4 heat on top of that, means if you alpha strike while running, and you're never going to want to stop running with this thing because one of the 2 things that helps keep it alive, along with it having maximum armor, is that it's fairly fast for a medium mech. If you're running while alpha striking, you will overheat 10 points of heat. And as a quick reminder, when you're going up to 10 points of heat, we're talking about -2 movement points and +1 modifier to hit for that kind of overheating. And then, of course, if you do overheat that much, you're going to need to not fire a lot of things the next turn to cool down. Now, you can mitigate this somewhat by cycling weapons, but even just firing the 2 ER large lasers, which are probably the best weapons on this thing, or is going to overheat this by a couple of points while running, 2 points each turn. Now, that's not a lot, but it will build up to the point where if you do this every turn, you will eventually have to fire just one of them to cool down. And of course, I mean, while you're firing them at fairly long range, you're probably going to want to ping with the LRM-5s also, which is going to overheat you more. So overall, like there's some things about this that seem really good at first glance, but then you get into it and you're like, is it really that good though? I mean, there are some versions of the Crab that are much cheaper on the battle value that actually I think I might like to take instead of this if I'm just going to be firing the ER large lasers every turn anyway. There's versions of the Crab with a pair of ER large lasers that could kind of do this job just as well, if not better. So there's some, it's got promise. Like there's ideas in here that were good, but I think they equipped it a little poorly. The design definitely has some flaws. Now it's still not bad. I don't dislike this mech. I could see myself using this mech. The next version, though, I feel is a huge amount of unfulfilled promise. So the next version is the EXR-3P. So we maintain all of that same armor, massive amounts of armor for the size of mech that this is. The big change, though, is in the heat sinks, weapons, equipment, and yeah, let's get into that. So first thing is we drop down to 10 double heat sinks. So it's got less heat sinking capacity. Which, 20 heat sinking capacity is still pretty good for most mechs. We'll get into why there again might be some unfulfilled promise there in a minute. We come up with a reason for this thing to want to overheat by giving it triple strength Myomer, which is really nice. Of course, triple strength Myomer is going to speed it up. It's still got the size engine to give it 6-9 movement, but if you heat it up to 9 heat, with the triple strength Myomer effect and the -1 movement point at exactly 9 heat, you will drop down to 7-11 movement, which makes this thing even speedier and even harder to hit, which is really good. I do really like that. But then for the weapons, we've maintained some fairly heat-intensive weapons. We've got 2 large pulse lasers, 3 SRM-2s, and an ER small laser. Now, this is a really decent weapon loadout, but there's some issues with it. The first issue being, of course, that it could definitely massively overheat with this weapon loadout. But the second issue is there is nothing in this weapon loadout that gives you an odd number of heat. Now, you want an odd number of heat, so you can heat up to 9 heat specifically, because at 10 heat, you drop down to -2 movement points, and suddenly are significantly inhibiting the extra bonus that you're getting from the triple strength Myomer and its movement. Now, again, there is that other bonus of doubling melee hits, but the main weapons of this are in the arms, so you're not doing punches. The big melee hit you're probably going to do is a kick, if you want to still be able to fire your large pulse lasers, which you do want to do to try to maintain heat, probably, at least one of them. But without having anything odd, on the first turn to heat up to 9 heat, you're going to want to walk instead of run. And then every turn you're going to want to do exactly 20 heat to maintain it. But walking instead of running on the very first turn of the game means versus other, deep penetrator, interceptor mechs, ones that are getting into your opponent's side of the field, getting in behind enemies, you're going to be a bit behind them because you're only going to be able to walk 6 hexes the first turn rather than run 9 before speeding up to the 11 after getting the heat. I really feel like this is a hell of an oversight. There should have been a weapon in here that did 1 heat or 3 heat, something like that, so that you could run and heat up to 9 heat on the first turn and just be, going full steam ahead to intercept an enemy mech on the flank, isolate it, and try to tear it apart. Overall, again, this is one where I first look at it and I'm like, oh, this is a cool idea. And then I got into the nitty-gritty of analyzing and I'm like, it really doesn't live up to its purpose as well as it could have with just some slight tweaks. which is where we're going to get to all of my adjustments to the various versions of the Exhumer. So I made one custom variant of the first version, the 2X, and two custom variants of the 3P, the second version, because I was not fully satisfied with how they were in the game. So first, let's start, we're going to go over all three of my custom versions. Now, my custom versions of the mech were all designed by KIWF, my own personal mech design firm that was named after the last initials of its four founding members. Again, KIWF. Remember, don't just kill it with fire. So, Kill It With Fire designed three variants of the Exhumer. So the first one we're going to talk about is my variant of the 2X. Now, if you remember, just a few minutes ago, we discussed the 2X. It's got the 6.9 movement, the two LRM-5s, the two ER large lasers, and the MRM-10. Now, I dropped its heat sinks down from the 12 to 10 double heat sinks. I kept all the armor the same. I really liked it having maxed out armor. I kept all of the things that it had for reducing the weight, the ferrofibrous armor, the endosteel, the extra light fusion engine. Again, even though that can be a bit of an issue, but I've dealt with it a little more than the standard version had. Possibly, we'll see. But what I decided to do with this was I generally liked the idea of the EXR2X. I just thought it needed some better firepower in regards to its heat management to be able to hit people at that medium range. I feel like the Exhumer 2X is a mech that you want to run at and maintain a distance with its 6.9 movement and fire at fairly long range with those ER large lasers and the LRM-5s, and maybe when you get into the pinging range, start throwing out some MRM-10s, except that, of course, that's going to massively overheat the mech. So I wanted some more heat-efficient weaponry on this to be able to punch holes and crit seek with, versus the weapons it already had. So the big difference I've done is with the weight savings from removing some of the heat sinks and removing all of the weapons, I've given it two weapons only, but weapons that I think are a vast improvement from the weaponry it had, which is I gave it a heavy PPC in the right arm. Of course, this does 15 damage at up to 18 hexes away, and I gave it a rotary auto cannon 5, which does 5 points of damage each in up to 6 clusters. Of course, it could jam and has a fairly decent chance if you shoot actual full 6 clusters. Generally speaking, it's better to shoot at about 5 clusters every round, which has a much less chance of jamming. And this mech is made to be far more heat efficient, because generally speaking, we're talking about if you're firing 5 shots from the rotary auto cannon 5, running, and the heavy PPC, you're only going to overheat 2 points of heat, while still getting to fire all the weapons, while alpha striking and doing a 15-point damage shot, and then lots of crit seeking in there. I feel like this one does the damage of the Exhumer 2X much better than the Exhumer 2X does. And it did increase the battle value a bit, but not a huge amount. So the Exhumer 2X is at 1468 battle value. This brings it up to 1708. So a couple hundred battle value more, not a huge increase. And you know, in my opinion, the amount of capability that is increased from the Exhumer 2X to the Exhumer 2X KOWF is well worth the extra battle value. So yeah, I really like my version a lot better than the Canon version. Now next is the one that I was even more upset about, the Exhumer 3P, because the 3P was one where I felt like it had a ludicrous amount of potential, especially with the triple strength Myanmar on there. And I wanted to redesign it severely, so I actually wound up doing it twice. I made 2 different Exhumer 3Ps. There's the Exhumer 3P KIWF and the Exhumer 3P KIWF 2, both to better take advantage of the effects of that triple strength Myanmar. So again, now the first thing I did was with the Exhumer 3P KIWF is I upped the heat sinking capacity to 13 double heat sinks for 26 heat sinking capacity. I kept all of the things that keep the weight down. I kept the triple strength Myanmar, of course, that was very important. And I kept all of the awesome amounts of armor. But I wiped all of the weapons out and I changed them to the following weapon loadout. I've got the 2 large pulse lasers from the original, but then I've got 1 small X pulse laser in the left torso, a small re-engineered laser in the center torso, and 2 more small X pulse lasers in the center torso and right torso. So now the thing is, this gives a lot of weapons with odd numbers of heat to more efficiently get to that 9 heat. In fact, this particular weapons loadout I specifically calculated to be able to get you to the 9 heat while firing a decent amount of weapons, and then to maintain that 26 heat, so you stay at 9 heat every round. You can easily get those combinations of heat with these weapons, which is really good, and you can maintain that 11 speed to run in and then run in behind someone and unload on them with all these pulse weapons. I specifically wanted lots more pulse weapons than just the 2 large pulse lasers of the original, because this made it much more of an interceptor mech. So again, we have 3 small X pulse lasers along with the 2 large pulse lasers, so that while on the way in, you can zero in on an enemy light scout mech or interceptor mech, come in close to it and unload on it. And with your good amount of pulse weapon firepower and also your good amount of armor, you should be able to win that duel. There are very few mechs that I think will, as an interceptor, will beat this custom interceptor version of the Exhumer that I made. And also, of course, those small X pulse lasers have significantly better range than normal small pulse lasers, so that is really cool. Also, the re-engineered laser, small laser, is just kind of a backup weapon, mainly for getting certain, for meeting the weight requirements, as well as doing 4 damage if something gets point blank with you, but also is just a better version of a small laser with being able to do 1 more damage. It's overall better weapon loadout, but I was still not fully happy. I liked it a lot better than the custom version of the 3P Exhumer, but the thing that was in the back of my head that I really wanted on this thing, that I really wanted on the Exhumer, was a melee weapon of some kind. And of course, my favorite melee weapon is the hatchet. It is the most basic and the original melee weapon, but it's still, in my opinion, the best. And being that this version of the Exhumer has triple strength my armor, I feel like it was a total missed opportunity not to do a variant with a hatchet. So I made the Exhumer 3P KIWF 2, and this version, I keep the 2 large pulse lasers. That's the one thing that I've always kept because they are really good on this mech. But then I've gave it a hatchet, 2 small X pulse lasers, and the small re-engineered laser. I've also moved things around a little bit so that there is nothing else, no other weapons that is on the arm with the hatchet. I have freed up the space so that when using the hatchet, you will not have to not fire one of the weapons. I've made that arm weapon-free except for the hatchet itself, and instead moved the large pulse laser over to the left torso. Now this one, I also, to save some space, I had to drop it down to 10 double heat sinks, but actually with the less pulse weapons on this, this is fine. Again, this has the combinations to be able to get to that 9 heat and then maintain that 9 heat while you run in. And then when you do the hit with the hatchet, we're talking about, once you're heated up, 22 points of damage with that hatchet, which makes it a hell of an armor-piercing weapon. And remember, getting 2 extra difficulty, you can reduce the area that you're hitting in down to just the punch location table, which gives you a 1 in 6 chance of head capping with that hatchet. So there you go. Those are the custom versions I did. So in a moment, I'm going to get to the 6,000 battle value Dark Age Lance that I have constructed for my Exhumers. But before I do, I want to talk about what mech warrior I would recommend to pilot one of my Exhumers. And specifically, because it will be in the Lance, the Exhumer I want to pilot with this mech is the Exhumer 3P KIWF2, the one with the hatchet, will be piloted by Colin Bargiel. Now, Colin Bargiel has a gunnery skill of 4, a piloting skill of 2, which is going to really help with those hatchet hits. And their cost of their ability is cost 3. So now this is a mech warrior you will use when using cost 3 mech warriors, and they have a really good ability for a mech that has great maneuverability like this version of the Exhumer, especially when combined with the fact that it's going to get maneuvering ace from the Lance ability, but we'll talk about that in a minute. I also gave it Terrain Master Mountaineer. Now, the idea is that this lance is going to run around terrain and isolate enemies. We're going to get to all that in a second. But while doing so, it's going to make going over gravel, rough and ultra rough terrain, rubble, and changes in height much easier. Every one of those, you reduce one of the movement costs to go in it, which means only going up a single point of elevation each time will be free, which is amazing. It's just the one to enter the hex. You don't have to cost the one to go up. So if you're using him to run up and over hills, they will not slow him down at all, which I think will be very useful for this mech in being able to outmaneuver your opponents and close the distance with your enemies. Now let's get on to the lance I decided to make with the Exhumer. So for the lance, I wanted to stick with a Dark Age lance, since this is strictly a Dark Age mech. So I decided I was going to use a lot of mechs I have never used before in lance construction, because I very rarely make lances that are made to be even as far ahead as, say, the Jihad, let alone the Dark Ages. So I decided, though, also, I specifically wanted to use two versions of the Exhumer in this lance, and the two versions I wanted to use were both two of my custom versions. I specifically wanted to use the KIWF-2 with its hatchet, as well as the 2X KIWF with its heavy PVC and rotary autocannon 5, because I actually really was very happy with these designs. Liked them a lot. So I wanted to pick a lance type from the Clan Invasion book and the Clan Invasion box set on its force building rules. I wanted to pick a lance type that I could make that allowed a lot of customs in it. So one of the ones with less requirements. So for the lance type I've chosen to use with the force organization rules, we are making a recon star. So the rules of the recon star is that all units must possess a minimum walker cruise speed of 5 movement points, which they do, and at least 2 units in this formation must also possess the scout or striker rules. So I have 2 mechs in here that I added to my 2 custom versions that are both strikers. So I completely fulfill these rules. And then because of this, all members of the Recon Star receive the Maneuvering Ace ability, which the Maneuvering Ace ability allows them to do sidestepping like a quad mech, where it costs you 2 movement points instead of 1, but you don't have to turn. You can just move to a side hex, side forward hex while running, or also side rear hex for only 1 movement point while walking, but only while walking. Now, adding this ability onto all 4 of these mechs are going to make them very maneuverable, and the idea here is to have some maneuverable, fast, but powerful mechs to outmaneuver your opponent, isolate and separate 1 mech at a time, peel them off from the opponent's lance, take them down before redeploying somewhere else and moving on to the next mech. Hopefully pulling off a mech and separating them with your speed and maneuverability so that you can bide your time and pick them off 1 at a time, sowing, confusion and panic in your opponent's lines. Okay, so the first mech in the lance is my custom Exhumer 2X KIWF with its heavy PPC and rotary autocannon 6.9 movement. Again, this one is to stay at kind of a medium range, armor pierce and crit seek all on its own. Hopefully its speed, keeping far back, and its really decent armor is going to keep it from getting torn to pieces. This is a lance that does not have a lot of heavy or assault type mechs in it. It's actually a lance of 4 medium mechs, so I'm really relying on their speed, maneuverability, and firepower to keep themselves alive, and be the idea is to be a lance where everybody does their job pretty good. You have no expendable mechs, but you also have no, oh my god, I've lost because I lost my most heavy mech in this lance. Now the second mech here, of course, is the 3PKIWF2. This is again my other custom version, which has the hatchet. This is going to run in, it's going to intercept with all of its pulse lasers on an enemy speedy mech. It'll be the first enemy mech to die, hopefully. And then when you can, maybe speed around, get in the rear of a enemy mech, and then, chop them with that big armor-piercing hatchet in the rear. Now the next mech in my lance is the Rook, the NH3X. It has decent armor for a medium mech, as well as decent speed again, because that's what I'm focusing in on. So we've got 27 armor in the center torso, 9 on the full 9 on the head, 20 on the side torsos, 18 on the arms, 26 on the legs, 9 and 6 on the rear torso sections respectively. We've got 10 double heat sinks. It's got a 696 movement, so this one also adds in some jumping capability. But this one has a supercharger with the ability to possibly move and run up to 12 hexes when you need that extra burst of speed. And then it's got a blazer, which can do 12 damage, which is just enough to do a head cap. Now, this is not the best head capping weapon. I know there are issues with the blazer, but I did want to get some of these newer weapons from the Dark Age in there. So the blazer cannon is its big armor piercing weapon, but then it also has 4 medium lasers and a small laser. And with the amount of heat-seeking capacity, it's going to cycle. When it wants to fire at longer range and do armor piercing, it's going to hit with the blazer. When it wants to get close and do some crit seeking, it's going to fire with all the medium lasers. And if close enough, the small laser instead of the blazer to keep it from overheating too much. So this is a really cool mech to help crit seek for those big holes that get punched by the heavy PPC and the hatchet from my 2 Exhumers in the lens. And finally, one more mech to keep the line of medium range mechs firing at the enemy, both armor piercing and crit seeking. We have the Legionnaire LGN 2XU. This is a 50-ton mech. It's got 16 armor on the center torso, 13 on the sides, 10 on the arms, 16 on the legs, 5 and 4 on the rear torso sections respectively. But to counterbalance the reduction in armor versus the other mechs in this lance, this has better speed. It's got 7-11 movement. That 11 running is going to keep you alive. You can also, of course, find yourself, when you're in some good firing positions, into a heavy forest to also keep the target modifiers on you up while reducing the target modifiers on your enemy, because you will not have to move once you're in a heavy forest. And it's armed with an ultra autocannon 10 and a targeting computer. So when looking to do armor piercing, you can just full auto that ultra autocannon 10, doing 2 shots and trying to do 10 damage in 2 different places. Of course, you do need to roll an 8 or better to get the 2 hits, but that is the inherent risk of the ultra autocannons. But then the targeting computer, you could fire a single shot and look to hit somewhere that has already been pierced by some of the other mechs in this lance. So this is a nice versatile walking gun to help back up the rest of the mechs in my lance. So there you have it. That is my episode for the Exhumer. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Grokking Battletech, and if you did and you'd like to see me do more episodes like this one, be sure to give it a like, share it on all forms of social media, and comment down below. Let me know what mechs I should cover in the next episode of Grokking Battletech. And until next time, game on.